Hi there, and welcome back to Part B. And this side, we're going to work through the polarities of the axes and actually look at some conflict resolution and get right into really the meat of it. So conflicts with other people are fairly obvious to see, such as in a tug of war, literally or figuratively, but what about those inner conflicts within us? How do we spot them? Now, thankfully, we have astrology for this to spot and find solutions, understandings, and to develop and work with these conflicts. Again, while this is basic, the potential to spot polarities and tension in our lives can be quite illuminating when we focus on the house system. I'm going to run through a quick review of the polarities of the axes and the houses. What we went through in detail in the last section. This will just give a bit of a quick heads up. So on the first, in the 1-7 axis, we call it the encounter axis, houses 1 and 7. We have egoism, maybe too much kind of aligned with our own kind of selfish first house type needs, versus the altruism and the concerns for the other, that we could get lost in the other too much and have a polarity really on either side of those fences between either our own needs or getting lost in the other. In the 2-8, what we call the possession axis, holding houses number 2 and number 8, we have my possessions, my self-worth versus yours, and greed of obviously your own needs in terms of possessions, and versus the envy of others in the 8th house and that type of effect. So the 3-9 is called the thought axis, houses 3 and 9, and it's the collective thinking in the 3rd house versus our own thinking in the 9th house. We can think of that as unquestioning, which is 3rd house, versus self-opinionated, maybe a polarity of massive amounts of planets and energy up in the 9th house, which is in balance of the 3rd, and we become just kind of really self-opinionated, knowledge monster, which can be lovely, but just the awareness of even having that is very empowering. Now we move on to the 4-10 individuality axis, obviously houses 4 and 10, whereas we have the collective and our roots versus the individuation of the individual. So maybe we're too much of a conformist, lying dormant within our roots, home life, whatever, versus that kind of rebel sitting on top of the pile, or somebody that's just very driven and wants to obviously work a lot and has kind of those grand energies and aspirations for higher calling. So it's just about looking at those energy polarities as well too. The 5-11 axis is obviously called the relationship axis, and houses 5 and 11, the instinctive relationships, those kind of playful kind of energies within the 5th, versus those ideal chosen groups of moralities and defined specifics that we find in the 11th. So are we too open and playful in the 5th? Or are we too kind of idealistic and chosen and maybe hidden from even coming down to the playful games if we've got too much energy in the 11th? The 6 and 12 axis relates to houses 6 and 12, obviously, and it's the existence axis. Now maybe we get lost in the world of work and service to others, and that whole ideal in the 6th. And the essence of ourself and, really our 12th, our self-isolation could be too powerful and drawing us into that neck of the woods as well too. So quickly, we're just looking at the axis. We're going to go with them in details. Just kind of a quick run through to kind of reimagine what those house polarities could possibly be. So let's work with our charts in a real practical, earthy manner. And right now, you can actually go grab a pen and paper, some markers, crayons, whatever works for you, and obviously get your own chart out. For this activity, what I would recommend doing is choose a house from your chart that is empty and one house that has a lot of planets or activity in it. Your chart will be specific to you, so do the best you can with the chart you're given. Write down how you kind of relate and feel about this house and area of your life. So for example, you could write down, which house is it? Which house has all this massive amounts of energy? What do you do in this house? Is it the 3rd house, for example? Is it the 4th house of roots and family? Is it your 10th house of kind of higher vocation? How effective are you in that house? How easily drawn or comfortable are you there? Is there any particular difficulties for you there? what works smoothly for you there, and what kind of response do you get from the environment in that house. So I'd spend some time really with your chart, looking for where the juice is, where the energy, where the empty spot is, are they on an axis. Just make some kind of quick notes so you can kind of do that before we move into the next slides of looking at the polarities, because this will give you a nice kind of backdrop in place to really take in the information and relate it back to your chart. When you're done of that, then I would suggest skipping right ahead and we'll get into the actual polarities. To do that, I'm going to use my own chart, which is really common in Huber method anyway, for us to kind of use our own charts as examples. So this is my chart, and I'm going to explain all these crazy pictures I have up here. But basically, obviously, if we look at my chart, and we're going to keep this really simple, I have a decent amount of activity down here, nestled around the 4th house. I know it's bleeding into the 5th house as well too, but Jupiter's a big planet and it's right on the IC here. So basically, with I have a lot going on in my 4th house. I have Jupiter and South Node there, and it's in the real polarity of an opposition to my North Node and big old Uranus close by up there as well too. What do I do, and how effective am I in my 4th house? Well, 4th house of family, roots, etc. Let's see. It's in Taurus, so we have a nice, lovely home. We have pet ducks. We have an Aussie Shepherd dog, 22 acres of woods. I have a beautiful tractor and all the earthy goodness, gardens and things that could go along with that. I'm handy enough with a chainsaw and building those things around my house. We have the whole wood-fired hot tub and Venusian kind of ideals of what it takes to kind of relax and enjoy the good life. And basically, though, how drawn am I there? Well, maybe a little bit too much. Jupiter is conjunct my South Node, and it's kept me attached to my roots. Our family roots have been here for 7 generations, well over 200 years. And until my Saturn return and other Time Lord timings, I was really stuck and never felt that I should kind of individuate and kind of grow beyond my 4th house. And I never knew, leaving school. I never left school and went away for university until I was about my Saturn return. It was actually right at 30. So that was a big draw for me, that 4th house kind of ideals. What else can I tell you? Basically, engaging my astrology in that kind of Uranian 9th house in Scorpio up there in my North Node was absolutely something that I took a lot of time even relating to and getting my feet kind of underneath me. So leaving home or striking a synthesis to have the ducks and the astrology and my psychosynthesis practice has been a challenge that I've had to work really hard and lean into over the past 6 years or so. I really wrestled with my 9th house and my 10th house, and it was a real process. So basically, moving towards that individuation process up here to finding my kind of own grounds within my work life and my higher calling has been the real kind of polarity challenge within me based on what I described. So this resonates with me really cleanly. Been working on it really hard. There's still a lot of work to be done, but this just gives you a quick example of even how one planet, or dealing with our South Node and our North Node, depending on if they're on angles and what's going on, this is how we can kind of approach our chart cleanly, looking for polarities. Okay. So in terms of polarities, obviously opposition aspects are potential polarities. Stelliums, masses of planets in one areas, are going to be kind of a massive energy that could kind of redirect us. Any planets near the main angles, obviously, the AC, DC, the IC, and the MC. North Node and South Node configuration, again, depending on where they're placed, can be kind of driving energy on one side of the chart, causing polarity. And as we know, we have kind of one massive planet. Who knows what that could be? But pick a strong planet and look at your chart, depending on which sign it's in and what angle and everything else, could theoretically be really powerful for you. So if you've got Mars at a really strong placement, maybe near the MC or something like that, and nothing down around kind of the IC, then we could largely even say that that's potential polarity. So let's look at some examples and sources of tension of inner conflict then. Conflicts that occur within ourselves take a bit more effort in spotting and addressing. We can have the experience of one part of us saying yes while another part says no. So where do these inner messages come from? Many of our fears, such as taking a risk and doing something new in life, will have their origin in childhood, of course. So all of them are part of our personality, and we can identify them in the natal chart. How do we do this? So again, you want to keep this light and easy for our purposes. While there are many considerations in chart analysis, it does hold true that some strong chart points can be quite illuminating. So let's take a look at what we can get from a basic chart. And I would definitely stress not to overthink this. Looking at houses in this manner through an astrological lens may seem odd or perhaps a bit complicated, but I'd urge you just to basically keep it simple. Essentially what we're trying to do is find the juice of where the strong energies are and know what houses they are based on what we've already walked through within the houses and polarities. Okay, so here's another example. Basic with the Sun in the 10th house and the Saturn in the 4th house. And we could also say, what if we threw in another planet like the Moon down in the 4th also? If we imagine that the 10th house has the Sun and maybe some other planets in there similar to this chart, this suggests a needs to make a mark in the world to be seen as an individual. There's also an opposition aspect to Saturn in the 4th. The 4th house is concerned with family, roots, belonging, etc., like we spoke about. There's a natural conflict in this part of the personality that says basically go for it in the 10th house, and that expansive kind of Sagittarius pull, while Saturn, in all its desires for security and wanting to kind of put some wrapping paper and some duct tape and some real firm boundaries around things, and the opposition that it kind of aligns with the Sun, maybe putting the brakes on those wishes. Which one wins? As we become more aware and work with these energies, we can kind of learn to respect their qualities and to kind of bow our heads to what Saturn's needs are, and hopefully allow that massive amount of Sagittarian arrow to kind of direct itself as well too. It's the idea of achieving a blend between these areas and respecting Saturn's needs in the 4th house, and also respecting the needs of our Sun to individuate in the 10th. Maybe we pull back and stay safe in the 4th house while denying our expression in the 10th house, for example. The important consideration is that we simply can't stick our head in the sand and hope that it goes away while it eats us away inside. So it becomes a negotiation phase after the awareness of even where these energies are. This is a simple example of kind of documenting it. So not all sources of conflict are that easy to spot. For example, a polarity in the 1st house and the 7th house, my needs versus the other. How aware and ready are we and able, if we have a massive planets in the 1st house and we're more concerned with our own needs than others? Are we even willing to admit that? What if your relationships are suffering as this kind of ego self-presence is in conflict with bridging across to the 7th house of others? This is the objective beauty of astrology that we get to kind of see and work with. And again, it's not disrespecting that the ego has those strong needs and it's serving a function, but being aware that there would be a massive planets kind of giving you that kind of ego, kind of self-interested drive in the 1st house is really about understanding. So another example where is the juice in this chart. In this chart, we have massive big planets in the high-achieving Capricorn 11th house. The potential conflict here is someone that wants to hang out with selective groups of friends. Perhaps the general population / others is less appealing to them. That's especially true considering the North Node is down at the opposite end of the opposition, down in that 5th house. So accepting our chosen groups, moralities, and friends is fine. But if we are aware of why we avoid large groups of people, for example, which can be really indicative of that empty kind of 5th house with a North Node down there, perhaps we're shying away from them and sticking close to our own tribe. We can kind of accept and work with that process, respecting that there are these ideals to stick within this realm, but also an awareness that there's a real drive and importance to kind of find a blend and a match, and honoring both sides of that polarity is truly important. So, I mean, this individual is likely very aware of these tendencies as well, too. So to work with the polarities, so in this section we're going to give a little bit of insight of how to actually work with these polarities. So we're going to talk about the crosses. The first tip is within each cross lies a solution to work with the polarity. And when I say cross, I don't mean some other definition, maybe with crosses within the signs. We're actually going to apply these crosses to the houses, okay? So with that in mind, with tensions on any axis, it is always advisable, here's the key, I guess, it's always advisable to work from the other axis at 90 degrees for a possible way out of the conflict. So I'll make sense. I'll make some sense out of this. Basically, we're already acting from a certain motivation. So if we have a lot of planets, for example, on the cardinal axis of the first 7th house here, we're already really working and aware of that energy. What we're going to do is shift our focus 90 degrees and in any house. So if we have tensions and polarities on this axis, we shift it to this, from the 1 and 7 axis to the 4 and 10. The second 8 shifts to obviously the 5th and 11th, and the 3rd and 9th shifts from the 6th and the 12th, and vice versa. But we stay within each of those house axes. This will make sense with some examples. It sounds simple, right? But it's not. We need to basically respect 3 crosses, and at a behavioral level, we can kind of work with the energies within them. So let me just walk through some clean examples of these. As we know, energy is always kind of moving away from the center of the chart, like we expressed, that divine spark, that creation, and it's making its way to the houses on the outside. When there's a surplus of planetary energy in one area, there's a potential polarity. Here's a basic example of the tension and release through my simple rubber band trick. As we place emphasis on 90 degrees in the same cross, we relieve the tension and redirect the energy. So the alchemy of it all is basically it's always both and never either or. With awareness, we have the ability to do something about it. Always this will involve accepting that both sides have a right to exist in our lives. That's the key to it. It's not just leaning into that and denying ourselves those needs of maybe a massive planets up in the 10th house. It really is about acceptance and finding solutions and ways to honor both sides of those polarities and bring a blend in. I'm going to walk through some examples then of each of the cardinal crosses as they relate to you, and you've kind of probably have your chart already and mapped out where the juicy energies are for you in which houses. So if we look at the cardinal cross, which is composed of houses 1 and 7 and 4 and 10, for example, with a strong first house emphasis, the encounter revolves around the I. These individuals let others come to them. With a lot of planets on this side, they attract them with their strong personalities and take from them, if you will. 7th house people, on the other hand, go out and meet and give to others, and they might even lose themselves in the other. So with problems on the encounter axis, we look to the individuality axis for a solution. By becoming aware of ourselves as individuals, by strengthening our individuality, we can rise above the either me or you kind of conflicts. Sounds simple, right? Keep it light, and I know this is a different way of looking at it, but if we are losing ourselves within this realm, it makes sense that we would obviously focus on more of individuation and our roots and that type of idea. Likewise, if there's tension on the 410 individuality axis, this axis contains all the potential of the person growing up from the collective, leaving behind their roots, all the comforts and conditions of this early environment, become an individual. So with the massive planets up here, this could be someone who is free, autonomous, strong, and courageous, and is not afraid to go it alone. But the tensions on this axis come from a conflict between the expectations of the collective and the individual's need for independence and freedom for themselves. The solution lies in the 1-7 axis, where one-to-one encounters can help bridge that gap between the masses and the individual. Long story short, if there's this massive drive to kind of individuate or that we're stuck in our roots here. It's really about transferring that energy outward towards yourself and towards others. It's a simple way of looking at it, but like anything, most solutions can have a kind of a simple response. Again, take this back to your own chart, and if this applies to you, see what this type of thinking and how it can kind of reflect and work with your chart. So the next cross is the very sticky fixed cross. Again, don't get lost in what sign is here. Obviously, if the second house is in a fixed sign, something like Scorpio or Taurus or Leo, Aquarius, etc., that within any of that fixed axis, that's going to really augment this. But the second house is inherently the fixed cross, and it's a fixed house anyway. So within this kind of spectrum, problems on this axis are usually related to loss, which is the second house, or kind of renunciation, which is the 8th house. Basically having and not having. And that can lead to greed or envy, as we've talked about before. Those are extremes, of course. With tensions on this axis, we need to turn away from our preoccupation with possessions and soften our object-oriented approach, basically by making space in our lives for the human dimension of the relationship axis. Okay. On the flip side of that, if we have tension on the 5th and 11th axis, what we can do is basically, this can come out in kind of a fixed behavior. So in the 5th house is impressed behavior, or in the 11th house is kind of a rigid, over-selective idealism. Problems related to this can be alleviated by resorting to the 2nd and 8th house axis, but basically turning your attention to the economic, practical side of things and adopting a more kind of matter-of-fact approach. Paying the bills, attending to the other down-to-earth kind of necessities. It's a bit of a weird one, and the fixed cross, is obviously going to hold on to things a lot more than any of the other axes, especially if they're in a bunch of fixed signs. The next cross is the 3-9 axis and the 6-12 relating to the thinking axis and the existence axis. So obviously in the 3rd house we learn from the collective. Thinking here follows along prescribed paths leading to a specific, definable goal. For example, a person that studies anatomy to acquire knowledge of the map of the body. And in the 9th house, of course, the thinking takes on a different form. The goal or end result is more or less unpredictable and may go against the mainstream of established collective thinking. Tensions on this axis invariably result in an excessively theoretical approach to life. The existence axis, therefore, 6 and 12, provides a bit of an antidote by bringing us back to the real life down in the 6th house and requiring us to put our theories into practical use for the benefit of others. When we have tension on the 6-12th axis, the 6th house relates, of course, to our existence on the mundane level, while the 12th house has a lot to do with our existence in the larger sense, the more hidden aspects of our kind of ontological, deeper processes. The 6th house makes heavy demands on us, okay? Here we have to get involved in the fight for our existence, get our hands dirty, fulfill our duties, as well as be and remain on good terms with our bosses, colleagues, really at that kind of down-to-earth practical level. The pressure can become so great that we take refuge in the 12th house, where we isolate ourselves. Illness can serve our purpose here as a form of escape, but can also force us through isolation to reflect on what is not right in our daily relationship with the world. This is where the 3-9 axis comes in. We can use our mind constructively to overcome the panic and the fears of failure which may trouble us on this existence axis. Philosophical thinking can help put things in the right perspective again. It might seem really basic, but try it out for yourself depending on if this qualifies within your chart, and to kind of play around with these ideas. Just a few final notes. This is simply a tool, and we say your birth chart is certainly yours, but it's the map, not the actual territory. So by all means, please reject and accept and use it as it makes sense to you, and you'll know your lived life better than anyone and how your chart relates to that. If you decide that you want to try to work with it, then as you come across situations in your house polarities and your various life interactions, try shifting that axis. If there's a massive polarity, like I said, on that 3-9 axis, well, then maybe the 612 provides you with a bit of something you can relate to in terms of kind of working with that energy. As a tool, it won't solve everything, but it may provide you with some pathways forward. And that's how I see it. I use it as a kind of conceptual framework. I forget about it. And then, for example, with my massive kind of polarity in my around that kind of 410 axis of individuation, I realize every now and then I need to branch out to that encounter axis along that first house and seventh house. Super simple, and it's a super simple technique at that level, but that's how I kind of use it and work with it, realizing when I need to be branching out more. And within your polarities too, feel free to simply use it at that that real basic level, and yeah, good luck with it.